What if the $315 trillion global debt wasn't a crisis, but a machine designed to quietly funnel the world's wealth into the hands of a few invisible creditors? Every country you can name, from the United States to China, from Japan to Germany, is buried under mountains of IOUs. The US alone now carries over $38 trillion in obligations, the highest in its history. Europe owes roughly $14 trillion, Japan nearly $9 trillion. Even the oil kingdoms and export giants are chained to the same invisible ledger. But here's the paradox nobody can fully explain. If everyone owes money, who's actually getting paid? This is the financial backstory, where money, power, and history collide, and where nothing, not even debt, is as simple as it looks. Debt isn't just a weight dragging nations down. It's the architecture holding the modern world together, the hidden scaffolding behind every war, every boom, every financial crisis. And if you trace the trail of creditors far enough, you'll discover something unsettling. The world doesn't owe money to someone else. It owes it to itself. But that doesn't mean everyone benefits equally. To understand how we got here, a planet drowning in over $315 trillion of total debt, nearly 3 times the size of the global economy, we have to travel back to where it all began, not in Wall Street or Silicon Valley, but in the smoke and chaos of war. The year was 1694. England was locked in a brutal war with France and running out of gold. Desperate, the crown turned not to soldiers, but to merchants. In exchange for a permanent stream of interest payments backed by future taxes, those merchants agreed to fund the king's war chest. And to manage this revolutionary idea, they built a new institution, the Bank of England. For the first time, a government could spend money it didn't yet have. And in return, lenders received something even more powerful than gold, a promise backed by the nation itself, one that could be traded, bought, or sold. That promise became the world's most powerful financial weapon, the government bond. France copied it, the Netherlands perfected it, and when the newly born United States needed to fund its revolution and later its expansion westward, it borrowed the same idea. National debt stopped being a symbol of weakness. It became the badge of credibility. The ability to borrow became the ability to rule. Empires once fought to conquer land and extract gold. Now they issued paper to extract interest. The battlefield had moved from the front lines to the balance sheet. Fast forward 300 years. Debt isn't just a tool of empires anymore. It is the empire. The US owes $38 trillion. Japan over $9 trillion. And every 100 days, the world borrows another $1 trillion, fueling AI-driven bubbles and crypto DEFI explosions that mask the cracks. Every country owes. Every bank lends. Every citizen, through taxes, savings, and pensions, is both debtor and creditor in the same system. But who exactly sits on the other side of that transaction? Who really holds the rope? Let's start with the United States, because America's debt isn't just national, it's global. Out of that $38 trillion mountain, about half is publicly held, owed to investors rather than government agencies. Roughly 2/3 of those investors are domestic: American banks, pension funds, mutual funds, insurance firms, even the Federal Reserve itself. The rest, around $9 trillion, sits overseas. Japan leads with about $1 trillion, followed by China with roughly $800 billion, then the UK, Luxembourg, and Belgium. So when people say America is in debt to China, it's technically true, but only for about 2% of the total. In reality, most of America's debt is to itself. Here's how the loop works. The Treasury issues bonds. Banks and funds buy them. The Federal Reserve often buys them back, creating new dollars in the process, spiking inflation while Treasury auctions falter amid rising rates. Americans pay taxes that fund the interest on those bonds, which then flow into their own retirement accounts. It's a mirror maze of money, real enough to shape lives, yet circular enough to blur accountability. And this circularity doesn't stop at America's borders. Japan lends to the US through treasuries. The US lends to Europe via the IMF. Europe lends to developing nations through the World Bank. And developing nations lend right back by parking their reserves in Western bonds. It's a global game of financial hot potato, except the potato is made of promises. Every country holds someone else's IOU. Every IOU is backed by another promise. It's like a poker table where everyone's betting borrowed chips. And the only rule keeping the game alive is that nobody stands up. But now, in 2025, that rule is starting to break. AI-driven trading desks, crypto-based lending platforms, and ballooning DEFI debt are testing the limits of the system itself. And as governments race to print more money to hide the cracks, one question grows louder than ever. What happens when the game ends and someone finally calls the bluff? The global game of promises never ends. But behind the nations and the flags, behind the IMF, the World Bank, and the headlines, there's a fourth layer, the real empire that rules not by armies, but by algorithms. Welcome to the world of markets, the silent, invisible government of the planet. Behind every government bond sits a web of giants, hedge funds, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, and central banks, entities that collectively manage tens of trillions of dollars. These aren't just investors, they are the credit gatekeepers, deciding which nations borrow cheaply and which pay a premium just to survive. When they lose faith, currencies crumble, governments collapse, entire economies are rewritten overnight. Democracy decides who governs, but markets decide who survives. And at the center of it all stands the modern high priest of this global faith, the central bank. Central banks don't just manage debt, they manufacture it. Every time the Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, or the Bank of Japan buys government bonds, they create new money out of thin air, exchanging digital promises for IOUs. One institution's liability becomes another's asset. Every dollar, euro, or yen that exists in your account today began life as a unit of debt somewhere else. There is no such thing as debt-free money. Every coin, every bill, every digital dollar carries an invisible engraving. I owe you. For decades, this self-reinforcing loop ran on one fragile resource: confidence. As long as the world believed the system was sound, the illusion held. But confidence, once shaken, spreads faster than any virus. We've seen it before. In Greece, 2010, where panic over unpayable debt turned into riots, mass unemployment, and a lost generation. In Argentina, where defaults became a national curse. In Sri Lanka, where fuel vanished, governments fell, and foreign creditors tightened the noose. Each time, the same pattern emerges: bailouts for the system, austerity for the people, tax hikes, spending cuts, and broken promises dressed up as rescue packages. And yet, even after collapse, the same machine restarts. Old debts get restructured. New loans replace old ones. The debt wheel keeps spinning because it was never meant to stop. In the 21st century, debt isn't meant to be repaid. It's meant to be renewed. Governments roll it over, issue new bonds to cover the old, and call it refinancing. It's not a conspiracy, it's official policy. When you take a loan, you're expected to repay it. When a government takes one, it's expected to never stop borrowing. Interest becomes the real product, the rent charged for keeping the illusion alive. It's like a shark. If it ever stops swimming, it dies. The global economy now depends on that endless motion, on confidence, not repayment. The US will never pay off its $38 trillion debt. Japan, with public debt over 250% of its GDP, hasn't repaid in decades. And yet, investors still line up to buy more. Why? Because in this upside-down system, debt is no longer a liability. It's an asset. U.S. Treasury bonds are treated like financial gold. They back pensions, collateralize bank loans, and anchor the world's reserve currency. If Washington ever decided to pay off its debt, the world's most trusted financial instrument would vanish overnight. Imagine that. Banks would lose their safest asset. Pension funds would lose their foundation. The dollar supply would contract, triggering deflation, collapse, and chaos. So instead, governments do the opposite. They issue more, rhythmically, predictably, endlessly. Debt becomes the heartbeat of capitalism, pulsing through every mortgage, paycheck, and investment fund. When politicians talk about balancing the budget, it's political theater. The goal was never to end debt, only to make it believable enough to sustain. Because once belief fades, interest rates spike, credit seizes, and the illusion shatters. And now, in 2025, the edges of that belief are beginning to tear. AI algorithms are trading trillions in microseconds, creating feedback loops no human can control. Crypto-based lending platforms are collapsing under their own leverage. U.S. Treasury auctions are showing cracks. Fewer buyers, higher yields, growing fear. Inflation isn't local anymore, it's planetary. The old machine is overheating, and the new one, powered by DeFi, AI, and data-driven debt, is even more unstable. Every dollar printed buys a little more time, and a little less trust. When people say, we owe it to ourselves, they're only half right. Because the interest on this colossal web doesn't flow evenly. It flows upward, from taxpayers and workers to the institutions, funds, and investors who own the debt. Debt isn't just a transfer between nations. It's a transfer between classes. The rich own the bonds. The rest pay the interest. That's why global inequality and global indebtedness rise in perfect sync. It's not a bug, it's the design. Creditors aren't villains. Debtors aren't victims. They're just pieces of the same engine. An engine that must keep running, even when it's running out of fuel. So what happens when the engine stalls? When the borrowing slows and the promises finally collide with reality? The question, who's the creditor, stops being abstract and starts being personal. It's not China, it's not Wall Street, it's not the IMF. It's all of them, and us. Governments issue it, banks multiply it, investors trade it, and ordinary citizens depend on it. The lines between debtor and creditor have blurred into a single truth. Debt isn't just money anymore, it is money. Debt once meant bondage. Today, it means balance. But if that balance ever tips, if faith in the system ever truly breaks, we'll remember what debt really is. A promise that can't be kept forever. But here's the twist. You don't have to be trapped inside it. Because real freedom isn't about avoiding debt. It's about understanding it. Learning to build assets, skills, knowledge, resilience that no inflation or interest rate can take away. So before the next reset hits, protect what you can control. Your mind, your work, your value. Because when the illusion fades, those who understand the system won't fear it, they'll rebuild it. If this opened your eyes, hit like, share it with someone who still believes the system is unbreakable, and don't forget to subscribe. Because history doesn't repeat itself by accident. It repeats because we forget. And I'll show you where to look before the next chapter begins.